This Saturday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 p.m. Pacific Time, the 3-2, 1-1 in Big Ten Conference play Michigan State Spartans take the road against the number 6 undefeated rebounding 4-0, 1-0 in Big Ten Conference play Oregon Ducks. In Autzen Stadium, this game will be televised on Fox. Oregon right now is laying 24 points at home. Line opened up at minus 24.5 for Oregon. It's down by a half point to 24, but when you're over a 3-touchdown favorite, not much of a difference here. Oregon last won this matchup in 2018, 7-6 in the famously toxic 2018 Red Box Bowl, where Justin Herbert struggled against an elite Michigan State defense, but that Michigan State team had such a poverty offense, as Spartan fans know, that it only took one touchdown from Oregon to win, even in spite of Mario Cristobal's incompetent coaching. This is an intriguing game, as Friday night games have been competitive, more competitive from the underdog's perspective than spreads have often indicated. You get less time to prepare for these games, and the environments and feelings are a little bit different. So we'll see what happens here, obviously, on Friday. But I want to give you my preview and also prediction for this game, analyze it, break it down, see if Michigan State has a chance, what their path to victory would be, and also see what Oregon's path would be to blowing out the Spartans here, which they are favored to do. Before we dive deep, though, I want you, yes you, to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, comment your thoughts, your preview, your analysis, your prediction in the comment section below. Also, share this video and this channel around to other college football fans who are passionate and dedicated about the sport like we are, who start watching at noon and don't stop watching until after midnight. And also check out our Discord server and join it via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. We have a dedicated Michigan State football and also Oregon football thread. Dedicated threads for all 18 Big Ten Conference members. And there will probably be more threads in the future because conference expansion is happening right now. And you know, for the bigger leagues, it's operating behind the scenes. But we want to talk about college football, regular season games, and we'll get to preseason stuff in the preseason. Again, like, subscribe, hit the bell, share, comment, and also join the Discord server. Those things help you out and also help us out here, and we reinvest anything we get here into the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube. But let's dive in. And here on College Football with Sam, we like to look at things from a bird's eye view. We like to see the forest, the details, the topography, and then dive in to, of course, the finer things, the details, in this case, the players, the coaches, the specific matchups. Looking at these teams from a broad power ratings point of view. Keep in mind, these don't factor in matchups, of course, but for a game like this, you see that clearly there is a reason why Oregon is favored big time. The Ducks are viewed, according to FPI, as 18.4 points better than the average college football team. Michigan State's viewed by FPI as only about a half point better than the average college football team. And then you look at S&P Plus, Michigan State is viewed as negative 0.8 points better than the average college football team, or 0.8 points worse than the average college football team. Michigan State's really dead even in the FBS. In the Power 4, they're viewed as a below-average football team, and I would have to agree with that. They're very well coached, and I think that Jonathan Smith and Brian Lindgren and Joe Rossi, they're going to get as much talent out of this roster and as much scheme and fight as they can, which means I think, and we've seen this against Maryland and Boston College and Ohio State for a half, teams that are power rated higher than the Spartans, Michigan State has punched above their weight class for 3 games. But that's not always sustainable, especially for 4 quarters. You look at Oregon, I'd say Oregon has played down to their competition in almost a juxtaposition to Michigan State. Oregon, according to S&P Plus, is 24.2 points better than the average college football team. They game-controlled UCLA to death. They destroyed Oregon State on national TV. after playing Boise State and Idaho fairly close. And Boise State right now is undefeated. They just crushed Washington State. Boise State, in my view, is definitely a top 30, top 25 team. They're one of the better group of 5 teams in recent memory, specifically with Ashton Jeanty, but also they have a respectable defense, good trench play, great special teams, and that's a very good combination. They also have several staffers who used to be in the Power 5, then Power 5, now Power 4 in terms of jobs. Like Eric Chenander, their DC, was Nebraska's DC under Scott Frost, and you look at some of their other staffers who fit similar bills. Also, Boise State did use the portal well, and they're traditionally one of the more talented, G5 teams. But you look at Oregon, and I do think it's pretty obvious Oregon is better than Michigan State. You see that in points per play margin, where the Spartans, on a play-by-play basis, like comparing one of the Spartans' plays to one of their average opponent's plays, they are outscored on a play-by-play basis, looking again at their plays versus their combined average opponent play. They have a negative 0.066 points per play margin. Oregon, meanwhile, has a 0.296 points per play margin. Not negative, positive. That means for every one of Oregon's plays compared to every one of their average opponent's plays, they score 0.296 more points than their opponent does per play. So the Ducks, while not as dominant as the Buckeyes, not as dominant as many teams nationwide, I'd say it's safe to say they've underperformed so far this season. They are still clearly a good team. And especially in a year like this, which this year is weaker, in my opinion, than 2023 by a long shot. I think it's weaker than 2022 when you look at the teams at the top and probably the teams just outside of the top, although I don't want to go that far because, memory's not reliable all the time. But there is no 2022 or 2021 Georgia. There's no 19 LSU or 20 Bama. There's no 23 Michigan. There's no 19 Ohio State. Probably not even, I don't know if I'd go that far, but maybe not even a 2019 Clemson. Something like that. Like, this is a down year in football. Oregon, if they play their cards right, I still think can win the national championship, though it's much more of a stretch now than it was in the preseason, where I don't think it was a stretch at all. They have to be more dominant. They have to utilize their talent better and get some things figured out, because Ohio State's coming, and they're coming in 2 weeks of college football. It's no longer several games to prepare. They've played 4 games, and Dylan Gabriel right now is at the lower end of the spectrum. Lower end of the spectrum as in the extremely low end of the spectrum when you look at the average distance that his throws travel, which means Will Stein's running an incredible system, and he's done a good job of tailoring the offense to Gabriel's needs, but there are still obvious things, really outside of Dylan Gabriel too, that make this team, I'd say, worse than last year's team for Oregon. Michigan State is better than their last year selves. If I was pitting 2023 Michigan State against 2023 Oregon, I'd pick 2023 Oregon to win like 56-0 within the snap of a finger. Oregon is 12th in game control. Michigan State's 47th. Michigan State's played the 14th toughest strength of schedule. Oregon's played the 85th toughest strength of schedule. So regardless of what I just said, Oregon, again, is the better team. Yes, they've played a weaker strength of schedule, but Michigan State, they played Maryland and Boston College, who are at the level of Boise State. Boston College, when healthy, may be the same or maybe better, though that could be a stretch. Maryland's definitely worse than Boise State. I'd even side with Boston College perhaps being worse than Boise State. And Michigan State lost to BC, and they nearly lost to Maryland. Oregon did nearly lose to Boise State as well, but Oregon has looked like they're growing and maturing as a team over these previous 2 games that they've played. Michigan State, I think they are who they are at this point. They're not deep. They punch above their weight class. They'll give you a good fight, but that's really what this is. And the reason I think Michigan State has a chance here more than some people think is because of Oregon's struggles defending the quarterback, which still have persisted because of some of their struggles in running the football, which have still persisted. They do not have the offensive line they did last year, even with the improvements that have been made. I still think they have a great rushing offense. I still think their passing offense, short, intermediate in particular, can be elite. But it's not what it was last year, in large part not just due to the change at quarterback, but a lot of it I'd say is the offensive line. And Michigan State's front seven, a big, and I mean big, reason why they weren't able to do much against Ohio State was Ohio State is really good, like really good. And they have a dynamic set of running backs. They have a wide receiver core that I think is the most dynamic in the nation. Is it the best schemed? Do they have the quarterback to best take advantage of that? I don't think so. I think that like Jalen Milroe is your ideal quarterback to take care of a offense like the one that Ohio State wants to run. But Will Howard is good enough. A Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka and Carnell Tate are just awesome. And Will Howard, for example, has a stronger arm than Dillon Gabriel does. You look at this game, and Ohio State was just able to force turnovers, recover some from mistakes, silly mistakes by Michigan State, stop Michigan State in a poorly executed 4th and 1, and, well, Ohio State's offense was on the field. They were on the field for the majority of that first half, and they have really good receivers. Michigan State's secondary, by the way, is still bad. It's better than it was last year, but it is not good. And you see that especially in coverage. Like they're just not there yet. And Maryland was able to exploit that. Boston College majorly exploited it. Obviously, Ohio State, with one of the better passing offenses in the country, was going to exploit that. And Oregon can for sure. But what Michigan State has hope in is Oregon is not going to kill you deep the same way they did last season. They're not going to do that. Dillon Gabriel wants to get the ball out quickly. Will Stein wants to get the ball out quickly. And Gabriel has not done well under pressure. Michigan State, they didn't get much pressure on Will Howard, but again, a lot of that is due to scheme. The fact that Ohio State has a dangerous rushing attack, which kept Michigan State honest. They were on the field. And Ohio State's O-line at this point is better than Oregon in pass protection. It just is. It's one of the better offensive lines in the Big Ten in pass pro. In run blocking, I'll kind of have to see on that because their running backs are so good that I imagine they could compensate for even bad run blocking. And Iowa may be a test in that. Oregon could be another test in that. But Michigan State on the season, right now, they have 15 sacks. They have 15 sacks, 5 interceptions, 8 passes defended, 3 forced fumbles, a fumble recovery. I think that they can get some pressure on Dillon Gabriel and really test and move this Oregon offensive line. Michigan State will probably have the best overall pass rush. I know that Boise State had some pretty good pass rushers and front 7 players. But Michigan State overall, I think with the depth they have at linebacker, defensive end, defensive tackle, will be able to rotate and be able to test this Oregon offensive line for much of the game. For Oregon, meanwhile, it's all about keeping Dillon Gabriel safe. And if they can do that, and he's not under pressure, and he's able to run the football a bit, and the offensive line does a good job not just in pass blocking, but run blocking for Jordan James and Noah Whittington, well, game over. It may be a redo of the Ohio State-Michigan State game, but perhaps even worse because it's at Autzen Stadium. You're not going to have the crowd behind you if you're Michigan State. And I think that with Oregon's special teams and also some of the athletes I know that they do have, they can score as quickly and as efficiently as Ohio State can. And part of me in the preseason thought they could even do a much more efficient job than Ohio State in offense. And I think some of that is still there. It just hasn't been unlocked yet. Looking at these offenses, I think that everything goes to Oregon, to be frank. Gabriel's been the more efficient quarterback compared to Aiden Childs. Jordan James and Noah Whittington are better than Nate Carter and K'Ron Lynch-Adams. You look at the receivers, Nick Marsh has done a pretty good job for Michigan State. Same with Jaron Glover and others. Isaiah Johnson, for example, Monterey Foster Jr., But you look at Oregon, and if not for, I think, some of the handicapping by the scheme and Gabriel's capabilities, they would be recognized as one of the best receiver units in the country. I mean, Trayshawn Holden and Tez Johnson have combined for 7 touchdowns. Evan Stewart has not gotten the targets or yards that he wants. Oregon, by the way, is only averaging 10.7 yards per reception, which is really, really low. It's just since Gabriel's completing over 80% of his passes, his numbers are... It looks like he is a better downfield threat from basic generic stats on the surface, but you have to dive deeper. 10.7 average yards per reception is low, and you know how I know that? Because Michigan State's quarterback, who isn't even completing 60% of his passes and has thrown more interceptions than touchdowns, his receivers are averaging 13.6 yards per reception. Now, granted, Aiden Childs has a strong arm. He can be very accurate on the deep ball, but there are other teams who so far through the season are averaging, like Alabama, for example, or Ohio State, over 15 yards per reception. So, interesting thing to note there, but I think Oregon's better at literally everything. I mean, look at Oregon's offensive lineup. I'd take Trayshawn Holden, Evan Stewart, Tez Johnson, Josh Connerly Jr., Marcus Harper II, Charlie Picard, Iapani Lalolu, Johnny Cornelius, Terrence Ferguson, Dylan Gabriel, and Jordan James. I would take them over Jaron Glover, Monterey Foster Jr., Isaiah Thomas, Johnson, Brandon Baldwin, Luke Newman, Tanner Miller, Christian Phillips, Ashton Lepo, Jack Velling, Aiden Childs, Nate Carter, and Jay Koine. I think Tanner Miller is a better center objectively than Charlie Picard, but outside of that, Michigan State's offensive line is pretty banged up, and Oregon has a lot of talent on the lines of scrimmage, better receivers. I'd say even better tight end. Terrence Ferguson's having a quietly impressive season. 14 receptions, 177 receiving yards. Kenyon Sadiq has 11 receptions and 112 receiving yards as well. Patrick Herbert's even gotten in on the action. Michigan State's Jack Velling has 185 receiving yards and 13 receptions. Brennan Parachek and Michael Masunas have gotten involved at tight end as well. That's probably the closest area for this team. The closest. Outside of center. And I think that center is more distant. In fact, I probably should have put up here the fact that I think Oregon's better at tackle and guard, but that Michigan State's clearly better at center, because I think they are. Gabriel right now, he is completing, again, 81.5% of his passes. He has 1,192 passing yards, 8.8 average yards per pass attempt, 9 passing touchdowns, 1 interception, a 176.2 passer rating. He right now has a QBR that is 18th nationally with an 80.2 quarterback efficiency rating. Michigan State's Aiden Childs, meanwhile, 76 of 135 for 1,058 yards, 7.8 yards per pass attempt, 5 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, a 122.5 passer rating, and then his QBR is 59th, a 59.6 quarterback efficiency rating, which, if you all didn't know, is actually pretty close to Alex Orji. So sometimes the boom just ain't always worth it if the bust is right behind it, and that's been the case with Michigan State at quarterback. These rushing attacks, I would say, have potency and have been impressive. Oregon's 4.3 yards per carry is held down by some of their early disappointments. It's beginning to ramp up. They have 609 rushing yards and 7 rushing touchdowns. Michigan State has 662 rushing yards, 4.1 yards per carry, and 6 rushing touchdowns. And that's being weighed down by the fact that they've allowed, 10 sacks and negative 54 sack yards, which, if you take the sacks away and the yardage away, the numbers would look better. But K'Ron Lynch-Adams and Nate Carter have looked pretty good so far this season. Defensively, Michigan State, I think, has it on the defensive line. I think Oregon, once again, and maybe I'm not looking into things too well, I think once again they do have a defensive line that's underperforming the talent that they do have. And some of that may be scheme, development. I don't exactly know. But I know that I'd give Oregon defensive back. Linebackers a push. I think that Oregon's top end linebackers, their starters, have overall done a better job, but Michigan State is just so much deeper, and Jordan Turner has been very impressive so far this season. Had the pick against Will Howard, which was more on Will Howard than Jordan Turner. I don't know who he was throwing to there, but he's had a good year overall. You look at Oregon defensively, Bryce Betcher has stepped up big time, 28 total tackles, 3 passes defended, a pick. Derek Harmon has 2 sacks. Jordan Birch has 2.5 sacks. This defensive line for Oregon is 11 sacks through 4 games, just under 3 sacks per game. You check out teamrankings.com, and I'm using them because they don't count sacks against FCS opponents. You look at their passing defense, they're averaging 2.3 sacks per game, which is 40th. 2.3, well, times 3 because of the one FCS game. That is about 7 sacks against non-FCS opponents. So take from that what you will. I don't think this defensive line has been all that impressive, if I've got to be honest with you here. Rushing defense, a lot of this is because Oregon faced Ashton Jeanty. So I think that there is a negative bias against Oregon's rush defense because they face the nation's best running back by a mile. But still, allowing 4.5 yards per rush attempt, their defensive line has at times, for brief moments, looked vulnerable against Oregon State, who has a good rushing offense, probably similar in caliber to Michigan State's, if not slightly better, and also to UCLA as well. And they're allowing 133 rushing yards per game. Again, though, negative bias to Oregon's rushing defense. It's better than the numbers suggest because they played Ashton Jeanty, who is insane. And right now, if what he's done in his first few games pan out for the rest of the year, he's actually on pace to break well over 2,000 rushing yards, which is just crazy. Absolutely crazy. I'd take Michigan State on the defensive line because, look, they've played Quinshon Judkins. They've played Travion Henderson. They played Trayshawn Ward and also Thomas Castellanos and Roman Hemby, and they're only allowing 3.6 yards per rush attempt. They have not faced the same caliber of running back, not even close to Ashton Jeanty statistically, but they have faced a larger sample size of players who I could classify as great running backs, and they're performing at a higher level. Teams are also running the football in Michigan State for darn near 40 attempts per game as opposed to the 29.7 for Oregon. So teams run the football more on Michigan State, about 10 or 11 more attempts per game compared to Oregon. And yet Michigan State's only allowing about 6 more rushing yards per game. So run defense goes in favor of the Spartans. It's the same thing with pass rush, as the Spartans have faced better offensive lines, gotten home more often than not. So that's why I give that to them. In terms of passing defense, though, Oregon has done a better job defending the pass. Part of this is because, again, easier strength of schedule, but they're 4th in opponent yards per pass attempt and opponent yards per completion. Michigan State's outside of the top 40 in both of those. So that's where I stand on the defensive breakdown. In the trenches, I would give Oregon the edge slightly. It's not as big as I thought it would be in the preseason. Just the slight edge to Oregon here in the trenches. Just slightly. You know, I look at really the offensive lines for both of these schools. Oregon's is clearly better. For the defensive line, I think Michigan State's is clearly better, but not by the same margin. Oregon, I think, does have talent on the D-line. They have depth there. Same thing with Michigan State. Michigan State's just executed better. On the offensive line, it's clear Oregon has far better depth. They have better players overall. There's just 1 out of 5 players are better for Michigan State than Oregon. And that's the most important position in center, but 20% of the offensive line can't carry 100% of the unit. You just can't do that. Michigan State's been banged up with injuries, so no more comments on that. And as for special teams, I would take Michigan State over Oregon. Michigan State has been doing a good job kicking in the kicking game. Jonathan Kim is 8 of 8 on field goals with a long of 51, 10 of 11 on extra points. You look for Oregon. Atticus Sappington is 6 of 7 on field goal attempts, Long of 42, and he's 14 of 16 on extra points. I don't know why he's missing extra points, but it is what it is. And Oregon, they've done a good job with, for example, Tez Johnson and also Noah Whittington of returning kickoffs and punts. But I don't know if that was a one-time thing against Boise State or not. And I would rather trust a more reliable kicker and punter than just simply relying on a return game, which I don't know how sustainable that is, especially in Big Ten conference play. So I give the edge to the Spartans here. I do. But I think Oregon has a lot of talent and a lot of potential on that special teams unit. As for coaching, I think Michigan State staff is a top 10, top 5 staff in all of college football. You're not seeing the results this year, at least as directly as one would think. I think you have to look more under the hood. That's because, well, they are severely limited in terms of development and talent because they're only 1 year in. And I think typically in year 2, maybe year 3 is when you see that jump of, these players are being developed now by a staff that knows what they're doing, unlike Jay Johnson, Mel Tucker, Scotty Hazelton, who sucked. I think that Jonathan Smith is better than Dan Lanning. I like Michigan State's defensive staff better. I think Joe Rossi's a better DC than Tosh Lupoy. And as for strength and conditioning, I thought that Oregon State under Jonathan Smith, when it came time, was more physical and was able to better punch above its weight class than Oregon under Dan Lanning. And maybe you disagree with that, but that is just my opinion. That's not an insult, by the way, to Dan Lanning and Oregon, because, again, I think that Michigan State staff, strength and conditioning included, is top 10, top 5. I think that Oregon does have a near elite great staff, and I do think that Dan Lanning will do great things at Oregon. The push here is offensive staff, because I think Will Stein's one of the best OCs in the country. At the same time, you do have Brian Lindgren and Jonathan Smith, who are great offensive minds too. So that's an area where I can't really give either team an edge. I will tell you, though, who I have winning this game, who ultimately has the edge, and that's Oregon. I don't think that Oregon covers, and I do think that this game will be what Ohio State, Michigan State, in all honesty, should have been, where it's close at the halftime and then the better team pulls away probably immediately after halftime. I think that's what's going to happen here. I think that Michigan State will score the majority of their 20 points before halftime. And then after halftime, things will begin to stall out. Oregon's athleticism will triumph. Their home field advantage will triumph. And I have them winning 38-20, an 18-point victory. Oregon will win. Michigan State will cover. It will be an entertaining game for about a half. That'll be it, though. And Oregon will come out undefeated. Once again, another conference win. We'll start preparing for Ohio State. You also have to think that with this being a Friday night game, a little less time to prepare, a different mood and feeling, and with Ohio State, they're coming. And they're coming to Outson. You wonder if Oregon may look ahead. I don't think they will because, well, Jonathan Smith is Michigan State's head coach, and Lanning has familiarity with him. Lanning has lost to him before, but that's something to keep in mind that could happen here. Thank you all so much for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488 and Brasco Rascal for being Heisman members and sponsoring this video and channel. Thanks to Chris Lane, Connor OH, Ismar, Tyler Nye, and Chilton Cush for being All-American members. Thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell for being All-Conference members. Have a great day, everyone. Check out my merchandise store via the link in the description, down below in the pinned comment. Same with my Patreon page and Discord server links. Have a great day, guys, and I will see you all around. Go green and go Ducks.